Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Book Mom's Favorites, Books My Mother Loved, a memorial to my mother. So my mother liked a lot of eclectic stuff. She even liked reading Harlequin romances back when she was in university, sort of during exam time when she needed to de-stress. She'd read them because they were easy and predictable and didn't require thinking and didn't require analysis. So there's a lot of variety in the kinds of stuff that my mother liked. I mean, so far, we've had Lawrence Durrell. There has been the John Dos Passos USA trilogy, a couple of light and airy, fluffy, so-called cozy mysteries. This next book on the list, Jasper Fforde's The Eyre Affair. And I think that combining elements of Monty Python, Harry Potter, Stephen Hawking, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer is talking this up a little bit much. The thing is that the Thursday Next series, fine, but I think that calling it all of these things is trying a little too hard. There are bits of Monty Python in it, I grant, because Monty Python has been foundational in a lot of ways in terms of the kind of direction humor has taken in some ways. The choice of ending sketches, instead of trying to make a proper ending to a sketch, just having some man walk on the scene and say, "This is getting too silly, so we're going to stop." Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the thing about Buffy the Vampire Slayer is that there are kind of really two major lines to Buffy, at least when I think of it. But then again, I mean, if you talk to somebody who's really, really serious about the meta of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you'll probably hear some other things. But for me, Buffy the Vampire Slayer always reads as a show with a lot of very, very witty writing and more or less solid plot arcing, with an understanding that things can't be horrible and serious all the time, at least until you hit the 6th and 7th season, at which point things are horrible way more of the time than they need to be. But that's neither here nor there. I genuinely don't know where the Stephen Hawking fits into it, unless you're just talking about the fact that people in it are smart and are doing vaguely time travel-y, time warpy things. But then again, I've never read A Brief History of Time, so who knows? The thing about this book is that we're dealing with an alternate universe that's kind of playing with a lot of possibility. Among other things, it's clearly playing with time and playing with the manipulation of reality. It's called The Eyre Affair because the villain in this book, Acheron Hades, which is a melodramatically ridiculous name if ever I've heard one, but then again, everybody in this book seems to have ridiculous names because, I mean, well, our lead character's name is literally Thursday Next. Thursday is her first name, Next is her surname. And, not to mention the ever delightful man whose name is Braxton Hicks. Anyways, so in this book, it has become possible, among other things, to literally change how a book reads, that if you go to the original manuscript of the book, that there are ways in which one can enter it and cause a change in that book to everything forward, which fundamentally has to do with temporal manipulation. I mean, You can argue that it's entering the metaphysical space of the book, which exists on another plane of existence because imagination, connection to alternate realities, blah, blah, blah. But I'll be honest with you, that kind of thing really usually fundamentally boils down to temporal theory. Temporal theory kinds of stuff. Anyways, our protagonist, she spends this book trying to hunt down this guy, Acheron Hades, who's kind of like the Joker. Like, he's just chaotic evil. He just likes killing stuff, and he wants to be well known and famous, and he doesn't really have a conscience, and he likes stealing stuff and being famous and having things. And so he'll just do stuff in order to get money and fame and because it's fun. There's a large portion of who and what he is that is Joker-like in that quality of, well, it's fun. Or at least Joker-like if you're talking about Batman the Animated Series sort of Joker. I grant I haven't read the comics, and this certainly isn't going to be the Heath Ledger sort of Joker. This is going to be a Joker who's doing it because he's having a jolly good time. And that's what Acheron Hades is doing in this book. He's just having a good time. Through the course of it, Thursday's uncle has invented a machine that will allow you to literally enter a book, as in to sort of exist within the reality of the book. So if you walk into Jane Eyre, you get to, watch Rochester chasing around after Jane and Jane doing her thing. And anyways, so they are trying to keep the book more or less unchanged. And near the end, the thing is, the Eyre Affair, part of what makes this so much more central, aside from the fact that, of course, by the end of it, Hades specifically kidnaps Jane Eyre, and Thursday has to rescue her and get her back into the book, and then has to effectively live in the book Jane Eyre until the end of the book, the end of the plot line of the book, in order to sort of stop Hades from doing things. But what happens is, though, that early on in this book, we are told that she has met Rochester from Jane Eyre before, that when she was a child, she actually got to interact with him. She actually got to talk with him at various points in this book. He somehow escapes the pages of the book in order to save her life. He keeps her from bleeding out when Hades shoots her. And so this is a book that really, really plays around with the idea of the bounds of reality being strangely flexible. And it's an alternate reality also in which apparently everybody is still fighting over who owns the Crimean Peninsula, in which the Crimean War continues straight up through, to the present of this book. Which, maybe I've misread it, but appears to have been set in the 1980s. No, not the was it the 1980s? Yeah, it must have been the 1980s, because she was in university in the 70s. Anyway, it's a very entertaining read, it's a fun read, and I don't think that it combines elements of Monty Python, Harry Potter, Stephen Hawking, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I think what it combines is somebody who's read a lot of classic literature and who loves puns. That's what this really is. This is somebody who really, really loves puns and wants to write speculative fiction about what would happen if the reality of the novel bled over into our regular reality, and also if people were able to time travel. Because once you get novels being able to bleed into reality and time travel being real, you can really, really warp reality. And that's what Jasper Fforde does in this book. So this is, I think this speaks to something interesting in a completely separate way, and that interesting thing, of course, is the whole point of this series, which is my mom. Because when my mother died in March of 2019, whenever it is that somebody might stumble across this, I say again, as I've said before in this series, that my relationship with my mother was fraught by a bunch of different things, the upshot of which was that I never got to know her as an adult, as another person, as somebody with whom I could converse and share interests and so on and so forth. Now, part of that was that my mother and I were never the sorts of people who would have been friends if we weren't family. You know that we all have those family members with whom maybe we get along fine, but if you had met them and didn't have any obligation to them, you wouldn't have ever bothered to get to know them because you just don't really share any interests or anything. And the thing about this book is that it's different from the Lawrence Durrell stuff. It's different from the USA trilogy, which are serious books. Those are serious works and serious novels with serious people who are trying to say really serious things. And it's different from the cozy mysteries, which were so much of what my mother really, really enjoyed as she came up on the end of her life. Those last couple of years, she was always asking, could we find another mystery for her? Could we find another cozy mystery for her? Because that was what she wanted to read. Well, okay, she wanted to listen to an audiobook form, but, you know, my father read aloud to her a lot, too. But those are a very different animal, and they're kind of two extremes. And the Eyre Affair it's a separate thing. It's not the same kind of undiluted fluff that you get in the cozy mystery, but it's also not something that you can hear someone in the background talking in all capital letters about how it's great literature. This is a very, very good book. It's an entertaining book, and it's a fun book, and it's a page turner. And I say this because some of the books that I've been reading out of these lists I had my father compile, both of books that my mother loved and books that he thinks are good literature, a lot of those have not been page turners, at least not for me. A lot of them have been very, very hard to read. And I don't mean in the objective way of being able to read the words. That's very rarely a difficulty that I have. No, some of these have been very much in the way of, I really don't want to turn the page because I want to go read something else. This was not one of those books. And it's a little bit more of something for me to know and understand about my mother and what she liked and what she read and who she was as a person, and those times that I didn't and couldn't know. So it's been a pleasure to read this book, not just because of the book, but because it slots in another piece of something important for me. And I think that's all that I'm going to say about this, because I am getting unmitigatedly soppy. So I think that is everything, and I will see you all next week.